have to say that judging from the size of this crowd and its enthusiasm and paired with what's going on in the world, I don't think that there is anyone that any of us would rather hear from at this precise moment than Joanne Reid. You know that she'll be talking about her new book, which, by the way, is now sold out so much. It's in such high demand that they've already had to rush another printing. We've been trying to get it all over the place. It's called "The Man Who Sold America: Trump and the Unraveling," let's hope not, of the American Story. We are so fortunate to have Joy with us and her book to guide us as we try to make sense of the truly nonsensical, namely the troubling times in which we live. The Man Who Sold America, the title does kind of sum up the situation, wouldn't you say? It's an examination of the myriad forces that enabled Donald J. Trump to enter the American bloodstream and wind up as president. Joyanne explains how media celebrity, economic fatalism, the rise of the Tea Party and right-wing evangelicals, culture wars, voter suppression, Russian interference, and Trump's own craven deployment of racism and xenophobia came together in a perfect Trumpian storm, allowing a shameless and crude reality TV star to wrest control of the Republican Party, assault democratic norms and institutions, lower the bar of respect and civility in our public life, and position himself for another presidential election in 2020. How could this happen? And can the damage of the Trump presidency be undone? Or as one strategist quoted in Joy's book wonders, can the Republican Party stay this insane? Can the party of Trump ever return to being the party of Lincoln and Reagan? These are questions that Joyanne seeks to answer in her really lively, really well-written and compelling book. As you all know, she brings a wealth of experience and an acute political lens to this project. She's written one previous book, Fracture, about race and the Democratic Party, and it's a fantastic book also. I hope you've all read it. I know where you can get it if you haven't. And she's co-editor with E.J. Dionne of a book of Barack Obama's speeches, widely regarded, actually a president who knew how to give speeches. Anyway, Joy's widely regarded as one of America's most astute political analysts. She's a mainstay, as you all know, on Msnbc, where she's host of AM Joy every weekend and an occasional guest host on the Rachel Maddow Show. She's been a contributor to the New York Times, The Guardian, the Miami Herald, and Salon.com, and other publications. And by the way, I just mentioned E.J. Dionne. And we are delighted. We are absolutely delighted that EJ is here to be in conversation with our esteemed author tonight. You all know EJ through his incredibly wonderful, brilliant, astute, everything fantastic column in the Washington Post and the many exceptional books he has written on American politics, government, religion, and culture. Some of you may know him as a commentator on NPR, professor at Georgetown, visiting professor at Harvard, fellow at Brookings. I was also thinking earlier today about his many connections to Politics and Prose. He has been here for every book he's written, that would be 7 times, as a moderator and a panelist, and yes, as a very loyal customer. He was just telling me before the event that he and his wife, Mary, and their 3 children, James, Julia, and Margot, have been coming to the store since his kids were born, and they are now in their 20s. Most important for all of you out there, though, this is really important. His next book, number 8, is called Code Red. It's about how progressives and moderates can unite to save the country. And it will be published. Timing could not be more impeccable. It will be published the day after the Iowa caucuses. So with no further ado, and with great joy on my end and on our end, please welcome Joy, Ann Reid, and E.J. Dionne.
There aren't many of you here as old enough as I am to remember John F. Kennedy's trip to Paris. Remember when he and Jacqueline Kennedy went to Paris and he said, "I am the man who accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris." And so I want to be known forever as the man who accompanied Joy Ann Reid to Politics and Prose. So, I just want to say three things before I start. Is it off again? Oh, good. I want to say three things. First of all, I'm honored to be here for three reasons. First, the crowd at Politics and Prose. People who come here are among the most civically, politically engaged and aware people in our nation. And God bless you all for being here tonight. Second, this is an amazing institution, as so many of you know, and I really salute Brad and Lissa. It goes way back when Carla Cohen and Barbara Mead started the well, now it is a restaurant, and this bookstore, and David Cohen, so many of us remember, a legendary activist. And that Brad and Lissa had the task of both continuing a great tradition, which they have done, and moving forward in a very difficult climate for independent bookstores. And I want you to know that independent bookstores like this are on the comeback because of people like Brad and Lissa. But lastly, and most importantly, it's an honor to be here with Joy. I love Joy Reid. And I always say that I was a fan before I was a friend. And many of you probably had the same experience my wife and I, Mary, had, which is when Joy started doing commentary on MSNBC before they had the wisdom to give her a show of her own. She would come on and Mary would say, this Joy Reid really knows what she's talking about. She's really shrewd. She really understands politics, and she stands up against the conventional wisdom even when it's hard. And so I can't tell you, Joy invites this because of her name, but it is a joy to be with Joy. And I love being a part of her show. And by the way, you should know that she is as lovely a human being as she presents on television, which is not always the case, I think. So I want to begin tonight, partly because I know some of this story, but some of you don't, that this book comes out of not only Joy's moral and political commitments, but it really comes out of experience. President Joy told me this coming in. We have a president right now who said that the Second Amendment lets him, at the second article of the Constitution, Article 2, lets him do anything he wants. That's why she wrote this book. But it also, from her past and from her family's past, this is especially troubling. And I'd just like you to tell people who you are, some about who you are, because it's so important to this book.
Well, first of all, I want to say, before I do that, I want to say thank you also to Lissa and Brad, to Politics and Prose. This is awesome. Thank you to all of you for taking the time out to come here. Like the comedian said, you could have done anything with your time now. You could have been anywhere, but appreciate that you guys are here. And to say it's mutual love, because I actually asked EJ to do this while we were on the show. As he's getting up from the segment, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Do you want to come with me? Because do this with me? Because there was nobody else that I'd want to do it with. They had asked who I wanted. I wanted you. So I literally pitched as he's trying to leave, like to go.
Yeah, I
leave
couldn't say no. I was stuck.
We put him on the spot because there are cameras in there, and they didn't know if they were on. So he said yes. I appreciate
She
that.
wouldn't let me into one of her legendary selfies that I couldn't.
Little bribery, but thank you for being here. And so to answer your question, basically, my background is a lot like the ones that Donald Trump would have labeled the S-hole countries. Right. So so my father came from the Congo. He came here in 1960. It's interestingly enough, he came on the same program that Barack Obama's father came on. Because when the Congo and Kenya and a lot of other African nations finally got their independence in the 1960s, interestingly enough, the United States and the then Soviet Union immediately went in and started pitching the what they considered to be the sort of technocratic elite in those countries. So anyone who had any kind of a position, any kind of a tribal position, anybody who they thought was anybody, they started pitching them and saying, hey, come to college either in Moscow or in the United States, because they wanted to have influence with the later governments once those independent governments were formed. So the Congo sent 9 men to the United States, including my father and his best friend, in 1960. So that's how he ended up here. And basically, because they weren't really familiar with geography, they just sort of sent people anywhere. My father's best friend ended up in Pomona, California, and my father ended up in Iowa. So And he wasn't the only one. A lot of other countries, they were just like, we want to find some place that is going to be affordable. We're going to send our young men, and we're going to send them somewhere. And this is inexpensive. It is Iowa. I like it. The name is short. We're going them there. And so all these Africans all end up in Iowa. There's all these, like, my father's yearbooks have all these white guys, and then these Africans sitting there like, yeah, you know. And they're just in the mix with these people. And the funny story that I actually only learned this year is that they lived on campus part of the time, and then when my father was when he was an upper graduate, I guess after freshman year, he moved in with this family, and I only recently found out this year, just doing some research on my father because he died a long time ago. Found out from my uncle, from my father's best friend, because my husband and I went to South Africa, that the mom's name in this family, this white Iowa cornbread Iowa family, the mom's name was Joanne. So one of my bucket list things is to go meet Joanne, because apparently that is who I'm named after. So there's this Iowa white lady who now lives in Nevada now, but I'm her namesake. And the two young men who lived in the house, one of them, who's only like 10 years older than me, considers himself my uncle. So I recently met him too. So I have this white guy he calls himself my uncle because he grew up with my dad. So it's weird. So that was him. And then my mother came from Guyana, which don't ever call it British Guyana. Guyanese, yes. GT massive. Yes, she came from Georgetown. And it's not Jonestown. There's no such thing as Jonestown. People try to say Jonestown. That's not real. That's an American city by some with a cult. So she's from Georgetown. Those were Americans. Those were not Guyanese people. So she came here also in 1960, and she had gone to college in Britain, in England, and then she came to graduate school, and it just so happened she also ended up in Iowa, which is weird. That's how they met, you know. So that's how my parents came here. And my mother wound up bringing a lot of her family, her brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces here by chain migration. She became a United States citizen by 1976. Voted for Carter. She was like a super, super liberal. My father was a super, super conservative. He loved Reagan. He thought George W. Bush was a great, like he was a conservative and she was a liberal. So they didn't get along. They didn't stay married. It didn't work out. As you can see, he went back to the Congo eventually, and she raised us. So that's it. So I was raised by a single mom, immigrant mom, who, go back to your country. We lived in Denver, Colorado. We first lived in New York, but when I was 2, we moved to Denver, Colorado. So we grew up in this town that was very typically American. All the black people were African American, mostly up from Texas. All the white people were, just regular white folks. You didn't have a lot of exoticism. And everyone who was Latino was just Mexican American. There weren't a lot of varieties. There were no Puerto Ricans. So it was just basically black, white, and Mexican, and us. We were the only Caribbean family. There were 4 African families. We knew all 4 of them. And it was just that, so I grew up here, but I grew up as an immigrant with a mother who had a thick accent, and where if people had an attitude with her, go back to where you came from, that's what they say. And so we're familiar with that, we were familiar with that as an immigrant family.
So when Joy flies from here to Iowa and announces her presidential candidacy, you're going to hear a lot of this story. So, there was something you particularly wanted to talk about, and it kind of flows naturally from what you just said, which is South Africa is actually important in this book. Yeah. This is a book about America, about the United States, about Donald Trump, but you think there is a lot we can learn from the South African experience. Yeah. I wanted you to talk to people about
absolutely. That. I mean, even though my parents were divorced, my father would call, he'd probably call every couple of months, and I was the only child who would speak to him. My sister and brother had wanted nothing to do with him, so I was the one who would talk with him. And so what we had in common was talking about politics. And that's the kind of thing that, he was a very funny guy. He had a great sense of humor. So we never talked about family stuff, because then I would just have to hang up on him. So we would just talk about politics. And he actually lived in South Africa, even though he was from Congo. When he left, my parents got divorced. He moved to South Africa, and that's where he worked his entire career. And he worked there, and I grew up in the 80s, I was young person in the 80s. So he was there during apartheid. So he was a black African man working in apartheid South Africa. And I would always ask him, how do you do that? Like, how are you able to do it? And he's like, well, we're not their blacks. So we're able to work here. But he did have to sleep in Botswana and work in South Africa, and he would have to travel back and forth because you couldn't sleep overnight in South Africa. So I grew up South Africa was just in our lives, both through his stories and our church, which was a Methodist church. It had a lot of South Africans come in and talk to us. It was like an issue that was important in our church, which is a very multi-ethnic, sort of multiracial church, but we were constantly talking about South Africa. So if you look at what's called the National Party or the Nationalist Party, that was started around 1914, but started apartheid in 1948, they called themselves Nationalists. The other nickname they called themselves were Christian Nationalists. Their purpose was to make South Africa, which was only 10% white, a white country. And so that if you were white, whether your background was being a Afrikaner who were Dutch background or British, because remember, South Africa broke free from Britain in 48, and that's when they started apartheid.